One of the worst things you can do with truly great literature is to try and label it, to try and fit it into a category. And this is especially true with great literature, and it is excruciatingly true with Dostoevsky. His Underground Man, The Underground Man, is a study of eccentricity, of a study of peculiarity, a study of a kind of universal perversity in humanity. But what it is not, emphatically, is a an example of a psychological condition. You can label it if you want. Others have. It's a favorite parlor game to try and slap narcissistic personality disorder, bipolar, schizoid, all of these terms that didn't exist for Dostoevsky, and were really only coming about a few generations later with Freud. They do a disservice. They rape the literature, quite frankly, by trying to fit it into a box. And The Underground Man is explicitly about pushing back at that. And in this book, you see a remarkable collection of quirks of character that you can fit into these little categories, but it just bleeds all the interest out of it, all the significance out of it, all the fun out of it, quite frankly. And so you don't want to go that route. But it is worth approaching these symptoms as characteristic of something larger. You don't have to get very far into it to find these peculiarities. The story itself, the novel itself, is divided into two sections. The first section is a kind of extended monologue. It has been called a confession at times. In it, you get the first person diatribe. I'll use that term, which is a little loaded. The first person diatribe of the so-called Underground Man. That's the only name we're given. Addressing a group. Whether or not that group is real or imaginary is an open question. The Underground Man does occasionally reference gentlemen as if he was addressing an audience, and what the character is of that audience is uncertain. The character of the Underground Man, you get the sense, is suspicious of this other group and somewhat hostile even. And so we can make some suppositions about that, but again, we have no evidence concrete that this other group exists. And the way that the character interacts, the Underground Man interacts with this other group, imaginary or not, is very telling for the character and suggestive of humanity as a whole. It begins very famously, I am a sick man, ellipses. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man. I think my liver is diseased. Then again, I don't know a thing about my illness. I'm not even sure what hurts. I'm not being treated and never have been, although I have respect both for medicine and for doctors. Besides, I'm extremely superstitious, at least enough to respect medicine. It is oppositional. It is dialectical. It is chaos. This is a mind kind of at war with itself. That bold first line, and translations vary considerably on these, so there's that to consider. But I am a sick man is a very strong statement. But then the ... ellipses tells you that, well, maybe there is some second thought going on there, as if, okay, let me recalibrate that. And he comes out with, I am a spiteful man. Okay, so sick is different. Sick is perhaps something victimized. Spiteful is a little bit more aggressive, a little bit stronger, perhaps. So maybe that's the calculation he's meant, but maybe that is itself a little too strong. So he goes with, I am an unattractive man, which again sort of backs the character off a little bit and paints him a bit more of as a victim. There is this presupposition going on of what the reception of these characteristics or of these statements would be. What the so-called gentlemen out there in the audience, which in this case would be all of the readers as well, might be suddenly judging this character to be. And that oppositional hostility is part and parcel of the entire book. That uncertainty and insecurity fueled by aggression and hostility towards everybody else is characteristic of the work as a whole. It is a profoundly antisocial character we are dealing with here. And these lines, this opening out of nowhere, suggests that. But the character develops over time, and we're treated to this entire first like two-thirds or the first third of the novel, really, this first section is that first person intense monologue where we are brought into his world, and it is a somewhat bizarre world. We learn about how judgmental he is of everybody else, how hostile he is to everybody else, how he doesn't like the people he's working with. He judges them superficially by their clothes, by their faces, and yet we are led to believe is not necessarily a matinee idol himself. And so that is a curious conundrum. And again, we can easily fall into that trap of defining him in fairly conventional, antiseptic terms of modern psychology, but that robs him. One of the primary aspects of his hostility is a resentment of categorization, and we can see his resistance to this in references to occasionally piano keys and organ stops, as if he was just an instrument to be played and had no will of his own, and free will is very important here. And this a repeated refrain about the about humanity or human beings and individuals as kind of formulaic variables or invariables, quite frankly. And he takes a particular hostility that when we come across it, he just throws out, well, you know, what is 2 times 2? And 2 times 2 equals 4. And he seems to resent that fact and the expectation that humanity, individuals, he particularly, could be predicted like that, could be reduced to that. And so he is constantly striving to break out of that, to resist the easy categorization and the refrains that keep coming back in this somewhat apparently disorganized stream of consciousness that is actually very, very exactingly woven. The picture of this person starts to really flesh out, and a remarkably unique view of the world and philosophy of humanity. He is particularly resistant to categorization and rationalization. He does not see human beings as being so particularly rational. And here you can see Dostoevsky pushing back against the Enlightenment tradition. Determinism, rationalism, the expectation that you can get a God's eye view and everything will be organized, and that all human beings will act out of a kind of predictable self-interest. They would never do anything that would hurt themselves. They would never do anything irrational. And he sees that as profoundly naive. Remember, this is coming after his stint in prison and his that followed his early enthusiasm for European socialism, let's say. So he is grappling with an awful lot of very negative ideas about human potential broadly. He is becoming a much more conservative person, let's say. And the characterization of free will is consuming him at this point. The understanding of it, the role that free will plays in a divinely ordered society. He doesn't see that we have any real understanding of a divinely ordered society. And so, how can we really grapple with the idea of free will? Because he sees that free will more and more in a modern civilization, a European civilization. Free will is often a problem for that because it is unpredictable, it is illogical, and the Enlightenment model of determinism and rationalism demands that human beings be rational. And so when you get to certain chunks of this early part of the book, it's important to just bear in mind that this is what he is arguing. There is a coherence to this rant. It is not just blah 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 blah. He is pointing out in a number of different ways that he is an individual voice. He recognizes that as an individual voice among many disparate voices. And it is his right and his, not obligation, but he almost has no choice to act accordingly, to act according to his own free will. And this is a tough mechanism for fiction, for literature broadly, because it doesn't necessarily fit into easy plotting. In plots, you need to have something very organized, structured, often believable, which means predictable, and logical and rational in different ways. And this book is not that. Again, the first half is a extended monologue. The second half involves characters interacting. It is more of a conventional narrative. And so the book itself is kind of at war with itself. And you can go off on, well, it's about 1/3 of the irrational versus 2/3 of the rational plot-like layout, and well, maybe that's an accurate calculation of all that. I don't think he's really going for that, but maybe he is. But within this, you see his constant refrain for free will, for the right to choose what is not necessarily socially acceptable or advantageous. He dwells on the word advantageous quite a bit. And so the constant characterization of him being strictly antisocial actually becomes a vision of everybody being antisocial, but it all working out in a somewhat less rational or less understandable, comprehensible version of divine design. And part of that is about being antisocial, about being self-destructive, about being hostile to everyone and everything just for spite, just to crack out of the expectations that society may have for you. At one point he says, "But I repeat for the 100th time, there is one case, only one, when a man may intentionally, consciously desire even something harmful to himself, something stupid, even very stupid, namely, in order to have the right to desire something even very stupid and not be bound by an obligation to desire only what is smart. After all, this very stupid thing, one's own whim, gentlemen, may in fact be the most advantageous thing on earth for people for me. It preserves for us what is most important and precious, that is, our personality, and our individuality. Existence itself demands that we act self-destructively from time to time, that we act antisocially from time to time, that we not be a cog in the machine. Here we are in the heart of the realist or early realist industrial revolutionary era, where he is seeing a kind of mechanism in society, a grand totalitarian vision that resists freedom. And perhaps, following his stint in prison, Dostoevsky has a particular passion for freedom, and the restriction of that he finds as dehumanizing. So the fullest expression of humanity for him would be the right to do something dumb, the right to do something antisocial, whether that is being hostile to everyone around you so that you live miserably or not is an open question. Significantly, this first part of the novel, which is titled Underground, is supposed to be taking place when he is 40 years old. He says he's like 40 years old, and I don't know, again, the circumstances of this so-called confession, but he is 40 years old. And then we transfer to the second half of the novel, where he is supposed to be 24 years old. And the events of that show a character who is remarkably consistent with the philosophy that we had laid out in the first half. And he is totally, completely antisocial. And at the end of it, you would figure that, well, okay, maybe after an experience of so negative an experience as what we follow him in that plot, maybe he learned something and amended his ways and became more open. But we got through that having read through the first half or the first third of the book, where we know that he did not. If anything, he just doubled down and drew up this philosophy for himself of self-degradation. It makes no sense, but it kind of makes a lot of sense.